This is the podcast for H.J. Chapman Freelance Law Practice. On Saturday the 11th of May 2013, I was lucky enough to be invited to give a talk to 20 or so MBA students at the University of New York in Prague, together with Ballardini and Jana Vlkova. Ballardini has completed law school in the United Kingdom and currently works for Richcliffe Consultancy, a substantial property developer active in Central Europe and the United Kingdom. Jana Vlkova is an advocate qualified in the Czech Republic who works for renowned constitutional law firm Tom & Devati and Partners, and the details about me, Howard Chapman, are available on my website www.hjchapman.com. As regards this session, the group was highly energetic and engaged throughout the day's worth of presentations, where we sought to explain the basics of certain legal concepts and the ways that lawyers can be used to help their businesses grow. We have reproduced all of the talks as a series of short audio streams. In case you were not at the talk, we hope this is the next best thing, and in any case we hope this is useful to you. So on with the show.
So you're going into negotiations. As I say, if you're buying, your big weapon is not the lawyer, it's the money. So you try to pay in stages. You don't want to give them all the money up front. And you might even say, I'll pay a third party who will hold the money, an escrow agent as it's known. The third party holds the money until everything's okay, and he will do that. And a bank will act as escrow agent relatively readily for a fee. It's good business.
Yeah, but it costs arm and a leg.
Sorry?
It costs arm and a leg to put everything in an escrow.
It does cost more, yeah. It does cost more, but it depends if you trust the counterparty. If it's a counterparty from a strange jurisdiction, you might be more likely to use an escrow agent.
I always instruct from escrow.
But do you really need it? What if your negotiation is, I'm going to pay you only once we sign the deal, or?
But who signs first? What comes first, the chicken or the egg?
Well, that's a permanent debate, right?
Yes, and the escrow agent avoids that because the escrow agent says, I've got the money and I promise to pay it to this person only when the deal is signed and this happens. Otherwise, the escrow agent is personally liable. And if that is UniCredit, they're good for the money. They've got the money. And the notary is personally liable as well. So
don't you usually sign and then go through? I'm using, for example, real estate purchasing. When you purchase real estate or anything in those terms, you always sign the contracts first and you pay the deposit.
Yes.
Once you pay the deposit, then it counts the next contract.
That's right.
Way how you're going to further the purchase.
So you, as a buyer, you protect yourself by paying a deposit. That's payment number one.
Yes.
And that incentivizes the seller to close the sale. And then you get payment number two. But payment number two could be to an escrow agent so that you're protected more as buyer. And then there'd have to be payment number three when you get registered as the owner of the property. So your material transaction, you've actually deferred the guy getting the money until you've actually got registered titles of the property. So that would be quite a good example of an escrow. But it does cost money.
A lot of money.
I prefer that than putting it directly to the seller and realizing there's an issue and I can't get my money back. It's going to Cyprus on holiday.
I could not understand the scope.
Escrow is easy. You will close deal with Sonia. I will be your escrow agent. You will pay her. You will give the money to me. And I will promise that in case the deal is closed, I will give the money to Sonia, and in case it doesn't work, I will give it back to you. Of course, for a fee.
Yeah.
This is an escrow plan. If you buy from China, you always use it. No, really, I always use, when I buy from China, I always use for the first or second time escrow. Then I buy directly when I know that the second party is reliable, let's say.
What do you buy from China? What do you buy from China?
No, we buy plastic, resins, etc.
So it's
parts produced, etc.
Escrow agent is nothing but a lawyer. That's what I mean.
It can be a lawyer. It's more often a bank.
A notary.
A notary. I mean, a bank will hold the money in the account. It will insist on the buyer and the seller having accounts in the same bank. And then he can just go flip it from one into his own escrow account and flip it to the other party's account on just a sort of key entry of stuff. So, okay. So, I'll touch on this briefly. If you're worried as well as a buyer, you would make it conditional. If the buyer is borrowing money, you would typically ask for it to be, any transaction to be subject to that finance being given. That's something that sellers don't like, and this is one of the reasons why you have big deal teams to argue about whether you can have these sorts of things. But that's what subject to finance means. It means I am borrowing money for this transaction, and I am not going to close, and there will be no liability for my failure to close because I haven't got finance.
I want to put in the deals that I know that there's going to be finance and we need to back, so it's clear that we can't be sued or come to sue or whatever, no headaches, because it's clear from day one on the papers this deal is subject to finance, subject to valuation, subject to 1,000 things. And what's MAC?
MAC is a material adverse change clause. Material adverse change means if anything changes for the worse commercially, for me, for the world, for everybody else, for you, I don't have to go through with this deal and I face no liability. So it's a cheap way to get out of it. So again, if you've got a buyer, the buyer will go subject to finance and MAC in the letter of intent, and then you will use that as a basis for the final negotiations.
So how do you define MAC?
Well, that's the point, isn't it? It's very flexible, so you can get out quite easily. I normally say material. I normally say materials worth 25% of the company's assets. It relates to any key individuals or is otherwise material, as it might mean in an ordinary way. There are other kinds of contractual protections that you can ask for as a buyer. You can ask for warranties and representations, which are basically statements of the status quo. I touched on it briefly before, but we're basically saying the company has no more than 5 employees. It has title to all of its real estate. It has title to the shares. And these material contracts it has are valid, for example. And if one of those take statements turns out not to be true, then the buyer sues for damages, and that damages claim is assessed by a court and counts as a reduction of the purchase price. So it's quite helpful.
One deal that we did, the money stayed, some of the purchase price, we were the sellers, some of the money stayed in an escrow for a number of, I think for 2 years, because they wanted to have confirming that all the warranties and representations that we gave were true. So sometimes they do ask for that some of the purchase price remains in an escrow. They will say to you, it's going to stay there because we are concerned that what you are saying and your warranties and representations are not true. So that's a sort of collateral against breach. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it often goes to price, as Thomas said before. TJ. Okay. It goes to price. So if you ask for too many warranties, you get a lower price. Undertaking is a promise to do something. I promise to make the company do this when it was not doing it at the moment. An indemnity is a promise to pay for something. Typically, there's an environmental liability that needs to be cleaned up. You just have a promise in the contract that I will pay the cost of that. Now let's not talk about that anymore and just talk about the rest of the agreement. On the other hand, we've got protecting a seller. The prime tool for the seller is that it's able to fix the process. It can tell how many people it wants to come to the party to bid. If it's a competitive auction, it'll probably get a better price. It can set the terms for participating. If it's a well-advised seller, it will actually prepare the agreement that it's prepared to sign right at the beginning, and then we'll say, I'd like your price and your signature on that agreement, or another agreement that you're prepared to sign. Saves time wasting, saves negotiations, saves fees. Typically, if you're a seller, the most important thing is that you get paid the full amount that you think it's worth. You produce your own valuation of what you want to get. You've got your document, you've got your price expectation. You might ask for proof of funds to get rid of time wasters. You might want a deposit of a suitably large amount, or what's known as a bid bond, which is a non-returnable deposit just for coming. If you want to see my data room, even a preliminary data room, you need to pay the bid bond just to come. So it cuts the number of bidders down, but it means the people that come are serious. I mentioned briefly what Albert's already talked about, that funding comes in two ways. It will come from equity by way of subscription for shares and loans from shareholders, and debt in terms of bank funding. And you'll need to make sure as a seller that you're definitely going to get that amount. And that will usually require letters from parent companies and all sorts of other things. I add that private equity houses don't give warranties, except very, very minimal. So if you're in the lucky position of being a minority shareholder with a private equity house in later life of one of your investments, then they normally go out on very good terms because they like clean exits, they like pure profits, they don't like lingering liabilities for breach of warranty, and so they don't give them. The other way of reducing the need to give warranties, and this is true even for people on the budget, for people who are selling companies on a budget, disclose everything you have. Full, complete disclosure is the cheapest way to sell a company. You put it all in the data room, get a good data room online, and then you can say, take it as you see it. I'm not giving you anything else. And that's market in the Czech Republic now. Full disclosure of the data room. So everything, the only thing you say is, I promise the data room's true, and that's it. It's a nice way to get a clean exit. Okay, so between the buyer's position and the seller's position, there's a gap about the width of this table. And how do you get these things? A lot of people have said, I need a lawyer's letter. I need you to write to these people and show them, because I don't like to be trifled with. Some people just come and throw a straw, bang the table. And basically, my reaction to this is that there are two negotiations that need to happen. The first negotiation is about commercial bargaining power. There's absolutely nothing that a lawyer can do about that. If somebody's forced to sell or buy, a lawyer cannot help. All it is acting. If you're talking about the second negotiation, which is a legal negotiation of a contract that most of the parties don't really care about, then lawyers can do quite a lot. And generally, the way to get good terms on those is to prepare, to have discussions with the client and to be at one with the client. Generally speaking, my way of dealing with that is to pick key battles. These things I'm not prepared to give in on. This one I will fight. I'll fight you to the death. And there are lawyers that say, I will fight you to the death on everything. And then if you say, I'll fight you to the death on that one, they normally say, well, if you have that one, can I have everything? And I say, well, yes, that's fine. Mm-hmm. And then I get what I want, and they get everything else. But then we get what we want. That's a win-win negotiation. It's a rare treat to get one of those. I guess in dealing with a lawyer, the key point is to discuss what the risks are attaching to the business and what's acceptable. On what terms do I want to sell this company? Is there anything that I can fall back to if I don't get those terms? And on each of the issues, there should be a list. There's position A, position B, position C. D is not acceptable on the key risks. And then other ones which are deal breakers, I absolutely will not move. And the reason for that is because if I sit there and bang the table and go, oh, we're not doing this, we're not doing this, we're not doing this, at the meeting, the other side's client will say, we know what your lawyer thinks, what do you think? And then if the client is not aware of these things, the client goes, well, I don't care, then none of these things will come to pass. The strong client is more powerful than the strong lawyer, is the summary of that. So it's worth just taking that extra time to go through any negotiation and what am I prepared to give in on? Because ultimately, it's the client that drives that process. It does rather depend on the commercial balance of power, which is a separate negotiation, but it's still nonetheless important.
How do you really give a client or whoever you have as a lawyer the belief that they're going to be protected? Because with today's laws, there are so many proposals that you can just swing it around and you're going to come from totally different directions, or you are like, well, I didn't thought of that.
There are always ways to challenge things. There have to be ways to challenge things. There have to be checks and balances in the law. because things can be abused. They can be used against the purpose for which they were written. Generally, the law would apply to prevent abuse against the purpose for which something is written. There's a market standard in documents for all these big transactions where you can catch these sorts of things. The key point is that, if you're arguing for weeks and weeks over the governing law, it's the wrong strategy. The business needs certain things which are absolutely key, and the way to protect those key things is to do proper due diligence on the seller and the buyer side. The seller needs to do due diligence too and identify the risks.
Because in most of these contracts and everything that you're going to sign, there's always going to be the protection of the seller and protection of the buyer.
Yes.
They're going to be always included into the one contract.
Yes.
There's never going to be separation.
Correct.
But what if one of the sides is not going to comply and there's absolutely nothing you can do because they're protected by the law from a different perspective? That is maybe but you have to have this waiting period for this to happen, and you are running into 3 months time period where you can do nothing, just wait.
Well, if there's a material risk of disrupting the business, you'd have to try and provide for that in the contract and anticipate what you would need to be comfortable to proceed. Otherwise, it's basically dealt with at an economic level. You would account your damages for breaching the agreement, and you would include the consequential losses from these things.
But isn't today with the SRO, especially because we have heard, especially in Czech Republic, so many nightmare stories where they created an SRO and then they move all their equities to another company, created a new SRO, and there's absolutely nothing you can do in order to get your money from those companies.
But that's an insolvency issue. If you rip the assets out of a shell so that it's insolvent and can't pay you, then that can be unwound if you're quick. If you go back, you can claw back the assets from those transactions and render them not valid. So there has to be a time period. The problem is when you don't use that time period, and then there is a problem.
That's why, you keep some of the purchase price in an escrow
Yes.
for a number of years, 1 year.
So that would be the case.
Yes.
You're going to use
We did this
that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And particularly with transactions, after people sell companies, they've got 4 or 5 company holding structure vehicles, and there's not going to be much in them. So you might hold back some of the purchase price and say, I'm not going to pay you that until the warranty period lapses and I've made sure that the company has what I think it has.
What happened with us is that we had 1 year to provide. I think the deal went through. We closed the deal. We sold the company, which owned an asset, but there was a contractual clause that the money was left, a certain amount of money. We couldn't get it. It was left with the escrow agent, and we had to provide some stupid documents. We had 1 year time, maximum 2. It was just minimum. And for that, until we got that document, money had to stay there in the escrow. And if we couldn't get that certain document, it would be released after 2 years back to us. Okay. And your protection is, if something is outstanding, you leave the money in the escrow. So you part with the money, and some of it stays there. And the buyer has to fulfill certain conditions before it's released completely. That's a way of protecting yourself against schemes in one way.
So while the money is in escrow, can that particular agent make money on it by investing?
Interest?
No.
No, just by interest.
Just by interest.
Accrued on the account.
So that's the
As
only
you
way.
would say.
Typically, escrow is non-interest bearing. You can have interest, but it's not usual to have interest bearing accounts for escrows. The agent takes its fee, and that's usually split 50-50, or you can negotiate it otherwise, but that would be what you would do. If you're distrustful of the counterparty, or you obtain a parent company guarantee from a guy with very big pockets, that would be another way. If it's a credible company, the parent company guarantee might be enough for you to move forward. I mean, if you look at a GE or something, then
Normally, the money stays there, it stays locked.
if you get escrow,
If you get the escrow.
if you get escrow, but sellers like to get their money. So sometimes they use their reputations to get the money out. That's a point for negotiation, and the only way to find out is to engage the other side and find out what their deal breakers are. That's the art.
So all that remains is for me to give a huge thanks to Aaron Johnson, course director of the MBA program at the University of New York in Prague. To find out more about the MBA course, please go to www.unypunip.cz. Otherwise, many thanks for listening.